You're selfish. Your brother is better than you. The words cracked across the Thanksgiving table like a whip. Forks froze halfway to lips, gravy steamed untouched, and the cranberry sauce gleamed red under the warm light, red like the sting on my cheeks. My father's voice was a hammer, his judgment the nail that pinned me in place for everyone to watch. Do you know what it feels like when your own family makes you the villain at your own table? When laughter dies but no one stands up for you. When the same blood that runs through you turns colder than strangers. Hi everyone. My name is Marielle, I'm 28 years old, and that night, under the weight of turkey and tradition, I learned what betrayal really tastes like. It's not just bitter. It's humiliating. My father didn't just compare me to my brother. He worshipped him, held him up like a golden trophy while I was cast as the dust collecting on the shelf. My brother smirked down at his plate, pretending not to enjoy it, but his lips curled. And my mother? She busied herself with the stuffing, as though if she kept her hands moving, maybe she wouldn't have to feel the sting of what was said. The room was heavy with silence after his words. I felt the heat rise in my chest, that sharp ache of old wounds being ripped open again. I thought of every dollar I had sent my brother for his rent. Every time I said yes when my parents asked me to cover his mistakes. Every time I sacrificed my own peace, my own future, just to keep the family balanced. And yet here I was being told I was selfish. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I simply set my fork down, folded my napkin and smiled. A small, sharp smile that cut through the quiet. Good, I said softly, my eyes locked on my father's. Then I'm done paying his rent. The air shifted. My brother's head snapped up, the smirk gone. My father's face turned the shade of the cranberries. My mother's hand froze, a spoon dangling in midair. No one moved. No one spoke. The silence wasn't just silence anymore. It was tension, thick and alive, crawling into every corner of the room. And in that stillness I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Power. Because for the first time in my life I wasn't swallowing their insults. I was serving them mine. And the real storm? It hadn't even begun yet. My brother was the first to break the silence. What do you mean you're done? His voice cracked, panicked, the confidence draining as fast as the color from his face. I leaned back in my chair, my hands folded in my lap like I was the calmest person in the room. Exactly what I said, I replied. No more rent. No more bills. No more me cleaning up after you. The words landed like stones. My mother gasped quietly, but not out of concern for me. It was for him. Always for him. She looked at me with the same eyes that had judged me my whole life. Eyes that said, how dare you break the unspoken rule. My father slammed his palm against the table so hard the glasses rattled. You think you can embarrass this family at Thanksgiving? He shouted, spit gathering at the corners of his mouth. Everything we've done for you, and this is how you repay us? By humiliating your brother. The hypocrisy burned. Everything they'd done for me? I thought of the nights I'd walked home from school alone while my brother was chauffeured to football practice. I thought of birthdays forgotten, of achievements brushed aside, of sacrifices made without acknowledgement. And yet I was the selfish one. I didn't raise my voice. I kept it steady, sharp, like glass you didn't see until it cut you. No, I said. I've been humiliating myself. Covering for him. Paying for him. Carrying him. But tonight I'm finished. My brother shifted in his chair, his voice small now, the arrogance gone. But I'll lose the apartment. I met his eyes for the first time. Then you'll finally learn what it feels like to be responsible. The silence returned, but this time it was heavier, more dangerous. My father's face was red, his fists trembling against the table, as though every fiber of his being wanted to put me back in my place. But I didn't flinch. I didn't cower. I just let the weight of my words settle into the room like smoke that couldn't be waved away. For the first time I wasn't their scapegoat. I was their reckoning. And deep inside a voice whispered, this is only the beginning. My father's chair scraped against the hardwood as he stood, towering above me like a storm ready to break. His jaw clenched, his voice low and venomous. You ungrateful child. After all we've given you. After all your mother sacrificed. You wouldn't even have a career without us. The word twisted in my stomach. They had never lifted a finger for my career. Not a dollar, not a word of encouragement. Every step I had climbed, every sleepless night, every deal I'd fought tooth and nail to secure, I had done alone. But in my father's version of history, they were always the architects of my success. I looked up at him slowly, deliberately. You didn't give me anything, I said, each word heavy, deliberate. You gave him everything. And I was the afterthought. The one you guilted into paying for the son you favored. My brother flinched like I had slapped him. My mother's lips pressed into a tight line, her eyes darting between us, unwilling to pick a side because deep down she already had. The table was a battlefield now. Dishes, candles, silverware turned into silent witnesses. The turkey lay carved and cooling, untouched. Steam from the mashed potatoes rose like ghostly breath into the air between us. My father's voice thundered again. You think money makes you better than him? Than us? Family isn't about who pays the bills. I stood this time, my chair sliding back with a screech that matched the tearing in my chest. No, family isn't about money, I shot back. But it also isn't about breaking one child to build a pedestal for the other. You made me his safety net and I let you. Not anymore. For a moment no one breathed. The heat of my father's rage clashed with the icy calm of my words. My brother's eyes darted to me, desperate, his voice trembling. So you just let me lose everything? I leaned across the table, my hands resting on the wood, my eyes never leaving his. Yes, I whispered. Because you've been living off what I've lost for too long. The room collapsed into silence again, but it wasn't the silence of shock anymore. It was the silence of a house about to split down the middle. And in that silence I knew, I hadn't just ended his rent tonight. I had ended the lie we'd all been living. My mother finally found her voice. It wasn't a shout, not even a plea, it was worse. It was that sharp, cold whisper she had perfected over the years, the kind that could cut flesh without raising above a murmur. Marielle, she said, her lips barely moving. Sit down. Apologize to your father. You will not disgrace this family in front of everyone. Everyone. The words sliced deeper than the turkey knife resting near her hand. Because this wasn't just a family dinner. Cousins, aunts, uncles sat stiff around the table, eyes down, plates full but untouched, pretending to be invisible. They had heard it all. They had always heard it all. I turned slowly, scanning their faces. Some avoided my gaze, others shifted uncomfortably, but not one of them spoke. Not one dared to say I wasn't selfish. Not one dared to say my father was wrong. Their silence was the cruelest loyalty of all, loyalty to comfort, to tradition, to not rocking the boat. I straightened my shoulders. If anyone should apologize, I said evenly, it should be him. 4 years of humiliation. For pretending I didn't matter while parading him as the favorite. My father's face burned crimson. Enough, he bellowed. You don't bite the hand that feeds you. I laughed then, a sharp, humorless sound that startled even me. Feeds me. My voice shook, not from fear but from the sheer absurdity. I've been feeding this family. Quietly. Consistently. Covering rent. Covering bills. Covering shame. And you still look me in the eye and call me selfish. The truth hung in the air, undeniable. My brother's breathing quickened. His eyes darted, exposed, cornered. You can't just stop, he whispered. What am I supposed to do? I turned to him fully. Grow up. A murmur rippled through the table. Not words, just the sound of discomfort, of relatives suddenly realizing they were trapped inside a scene no one would forget. My mother's eyes glistened with fury, her voice trembling now. You'll regret this, Marielle. One day you'll regret cutting ties with your own blood. I met her gaze, calm and unflinching. No, I said softly. The only thing I regret is waiting this long to stop. The silence that followed was suffocating. But for the first time it didn't weigh on me. It weighed on them. And I knew, this house of cards we called family had just started to collapse. The collapse didn't take long to show its cracks. My father pushed back from the table, his chest heaving, rage spilling out in jagged breaths. You think you're better than us now? Just because you make some money? You're nothing without this family. Nothing. The words should have hurt. They used to, for years they were the knife he kept sharp to keep me in line. But that night they fell dull. Because I finally understood. It wasn't love he had been feeding me all these years. It was control. I took a slow breath and stood taller. If I'm nothing without this family, then explain why this family can't survive without me paying for it. Gasps. Small, sharp collective. A cousin choked on a sip of wine, Someone's fork clattered against porcelain. My brother shifted like the floor beneath him had tilted. My mother tried to recover, her voice brittle but commanding. You don't air our dirty laundry at the table. I tilted my head. Then maybe you should have thought twice before hanging it on my shoulders. My father's hand trembled as he jabbed a finger toward me. You will sit down. You will shut your mouth. And you will keep paying for your brother until he gets on his feet. That was it. The mask slipped. It was never about love. It was never about fairness. It was about obedience. I was the mule carrying the golden sun on my back, and they expected me to do it forever. I pushed my chair all the way in, the sound echoing like a gavel in the tense room. No, I said. Just that one word, sharp and final. No. My brother's voice broke then, desperate, small. Please, Mariel. I'll get kicked out. I'll lose everything. I looked at him, really looked at him. He wasn't a child. He was a grown man hiding behind excuses, cushioned by the sacrifices I had made. And for the first time I saw him not as my brother, but as the weight that had been drowning me. You won't lose everything, I told him. You'll finally lose me. The silence shattered then. My father shouting, my mother gasping, relatives murmuring, but through it all I felt only one thing. Freedom. Because that night I realized, walking away wasn't the betrayal. Staying had been. The shouting didn't stop. It roared, it clawed, it twisted through the dining room like smoke you couldn't escape. My father's voice was a storm, booming, violent. You walk out that door, Marielle, and you are no daughter of mine. Don't come back begging when life chews you up. But his words no longer struck like lightning. They fizzled, empty thunder in a sky I no longer stood under. I reached for my coat draped over the chair, sliding it on with deliberate calm. Every movement felt cinematic, as if time had slowed just to watch me reclaim myself. My hands didn't tremble. My voice didn't crack. I've never begged you for anything, I said, my gaze steady. I've only ever paid. And tonight I'm done paying. The table was chaos now. Relatives whispering, shifting in their seats, some pretending to fuss with their food as if that could hide the spectacle unraveling before them. But I could see it in their eyes. Shock, maybe even admiration, though none of them dared to speak it aloud. My brother lunged halfway across the table, his voice breaking. Mariel, please. I can't do this without you. Don't do this to me. For years those words would have anchored me. For years I would have folded, carried him again. But that night I saw the truth. It was never without me, it was always on me. I steadied my breath, then spoke slowly, each word clear enough to carve into memory. You'll have to learn. Just like I did. Alone. My mother's eyes filled with something sharp. Not sorrow, not shame, but fury disguised as grief. One day you'll understand, she whispered. And you'll regret this. I slipped my arms into my coat, my movements fluid, unhurried. No, I said, my hand resting on the doorknob. One day you'll understand. And by then, it'll be too late. The door creaked as I pulled it open. Cold November air rushed in, scattering the warmth of roasted turkey and apple pie, chilling the room behind me. The sound of their voices dulled as I stepped onto the porch, but their silence, their stunned, wounded silence, followed me like a shadow. I didn't just leave the house that night. I left the role they had written for me. And for the first time in my life the air tasted like freedom. The cold air bit at my skin as I walked down the driveway, but it felt cleaner than the suffocating warmth I'd left behind. My heels clicked against the pavement, each step a drumbeat of finality. Behind me, muffled voices rose in panic. My brother's desperate pleas, my father's rage, my mother's bitter hisses, but they no longer chained me. Their noise was fading, replaced by something stronger. Silence. The kind of silence that holds power. I slid into my car, the leather seat icy against my palms, and for a moment I just sat there. My reflection stared back from the darkened window, eyes red-rimmed but fierce, lips trembling but curved into the faintest smile. I wasn't broken. I was free. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat. Message after message. Missed calls stacking like cards ready to topple. My brother, don't do this please. My mother, you'll regret humiliating us. My father, ungrateful brat, you're cut off. Cut off. The words almost made me laugh. They didn't realize, I had already cut them off. Not just from my wallet, from my soul. I drove home that night through streets lined with golden leaves and glowing street lamps, each one flickering like a reminder. You survived them. You survived the wait. And now you finally get to live. But freedom carries its own silence. Lying in bed later, the quiet pressed heavy on my chest. Old habits tried to creep in, guilt, fear, the instinct to make it right. I almost reached for the phone. Almost. Instead, I whispered into the darkness, "No more." The words didn't echo. They sank deep, rooting into me like steel. Because the truth was, I hadn't just left dinner. I had detonated the foundation of my family's power. For years they had depended on me, fed off me, used me. And now, without me, their walls would crumble. I imagined them back at that table, faces pale, the golden sun finally exposed as hollow. The rent unpaid. The safety net gone. The silence louder than any lecture. And for once, the burden wasn't mine. It was theirs. The next morning my phone buzzed again. Dozens of missed calls, unread messages. Desperation in digital form. My brother's texts grew shorter, more frantic. "I can't cover this month. They're going to evict me. Please, just one more time. You don't understand, I'll lose everything." My mother's words dripped venom masked as sorrow. "You're tearing this family apart. You've brought shame on us all." And then my father, the man who had thundered at me across the table, sent only one line. "We'll remember this when you come crawling back." But here's the truth, I never crawled back. Days passed. Their voices grew smaller, their demands weaker. I didn't answer, not once. And in that silence, they were forced to face something they had always avoided. Their own choices, their own dependency, their own favoritism laid bare without me to patch it over. Weeks later, I heard through a cousin. The golden son had lost the apartment. My father had to sell off investments to keep him afloat. My mother whispered excuses at gatherings, their perfect image cracking in front of the same relatives who had witnessed that Thanksgiving storm. As for me, I thrived. Without their endless weight, I poured my energy back into myself. Work flourished. Friendships deepened. I bought a place of my own, quiet, sunlit, free of ghosts. For the first time, I filled my fridge with food I bought only for me. I decorated walls that no one else could criticize. I laughed in rooms where no one could silence me. And yet, the sweetest part wasn't the success. It was the peace. I no longer carried their debts. I no longer chased their approval. I no longer mistook sacrifice for love. That Thanksgiving had been their stage for humiliation. But in trying to shame me, they freed me. They handed me the script, and I rewrote the ending. So when people ask me if I regret what I did, I tell them this. The day my father called me selfish was the day I learned the difference between being selfish and finally saving myself. One word echoed in my mind as I closed the door on them forever.